I guess to start with, if I define data fluency, at least in my eyes, so I guess its basic level, it's understanding or interpreting a data set to support sound business decisions. And I guess if I take that one step further, getting a succinct output that's data supported, which will support a business case or drive a business outcome. And so in terms of why is that crucial today, I think there's a couple of aspects to it. The obvious one I think would be we live in a digital world, right? An ever more digital world. There's increasing amounts of data, endless data points, and so there's a lot of noise. So the ability to interpret that data and to have a clean view of that data becomes more and more critical. I would say also, just with the way technology is moving, although data is still potentially fractured, I think there's more of a move to, or more of a facilitation to take fractured data and connect it. So whether that's less about having all your data potentially in one system, it's more about having maybe your data in one data warehouse. And so the ability to get a more holistic view of data is becoming easier. And so, in addition to that, then it's easier to provide analytics and insight off the back of that. And then there's also a job role type aspect to it with automation and AI. The data mining or the more operational workloads with regards to day-to-day is increasingly being replaced with systems and processes. And the bit where the human part is going to be important is going to be around linking back to kind of strategic executives and business decisions. So, and I guess the ability to tell stories based on that data to drive outcomes like that's probably where the world's going, and the role that the human employee may play, right, in kind of future space. What we've been focused on is trying to take what I would say is traditionally treasury type data, so primarily cash flow data, and leveraging that to provide additional insight to internal stakeholders, which would typically rely on more controllership accounting, close the books type data, which potentially gives a more live view of a situation prior to finalized numbers to say. So there's a couple of places. One, I think where it's been useful is on the collection side, looking at trending and performance, i.e. what are we collecting month to date? What are we collecting based on specific business days? Where do we expect to collect based on what we've seen in averages in recent periods? Who are those main customers that have made large payments to us? Is there something that looks unusual? How are we looking for the quarter? Are we concerned? Are we not? So I think that's been a big help, and there's some additional systems that are kind of replaced in the collection side that further drill down in some of that data. But I think we have a much better understanding now in terms of where we're performing, and just a better understanding actually of the cash flow cycle related to collections. Like what's the impact of, like, depending what day of the month the quarter ends on, or any month ends on, or something like that. And then the other one is maybe a little bit more holistically around pacing on things like cash flow, or more importantly, free cash flow. Like, where are we versus guide? What have been the big moving parts? It's given us more of an ability to make a conscious decision about how we look at our cash conversion cycle, how we look at some of our other kind of capital positions, such as return to shareholders through buybacks and things like that. So I think it's given us a much more strategic view in terms of where we sit from a cash flow perspective. The other piece, potentially where it's playing in across stakeholders, is more at a entity management level, which is just giving kind of a broader visibility to not just bank account information, but entity information, tax IDs, legal entity structure, bank account structure. So essentially everybody's singing off the same sheet, providing insights based on interpretation of data. So. Start with, or the philosophy is that we start with inputs or the questions, like what is the problem we're trying to solve? Not necessarily reporting or data output driven by Treasury, right? So ideally, we have an objective in terms of what we want to answer, and then we build out a set of reporting capabilities that allow people to either self-serve, right, based on the reports, or allows us to kind of provide insight from those reports ourselves. I think the other thing is around less is more. It's very easy when you're building out reports to just continue to build out report after report after report and claim that you're providing insight. So I think really being conscious about anything that we put out there, making sure it's succinct and it's got a clear goal. And more importantly, do we need that additional piece of information, or can it be answered elsewhere by enhancing what we already have? And then the other piece is around delivery. So is the intention that we will push a bunch of data or reporting or insight down to a particular person, or do we expect that person to be able to pull the data, or is it a bit of both? I think some of that depends a little bit on leveling. So for example, maybe on transactional type data, do we want accountants to be able to go in and kind of problem solve and look into some transaction level details? Maybe if it's the C-suite, we want it to be at 30,000 feet and we want to push it to them once a month or once a week. So they don't necessarily interact with the system, they're just interacting on the reporting side. So I think that's pretty fundamental. And it plays back into the less is more piece, right? What are the 3 or 4 critical bits of information that they want to know to aid their kind of next decision, versus just being given a huge data set where you can take it 10, 50, 100 different ways. The biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, is if you can go and solve somebody's problem at no cost to them. And I guess that comes back to my point around leveraging systems or capabilities that we already have within Treasury, like across broader stakeholders, because we're saying, hey, look, like you've got a problem, let me understand it. Like I have a set of data which I think can help solve that problem or give you some insights. And it's just a case of manipulating the data and creating a creating a report or creating a view that does that. But it's not something that they have to go and get funded, or they got to go and get a bunch of people like trained up on. So I think that obviously helps. Like if you can do something for nothing, that makes a big difference. It's certainly easy to get a foot in the door. I think, as I said earlier, maybe like it's designing around your stakeholders in mind, listening to feedback. Every time we build something out for a potential use case, we always kind of push that down to the end users pretty early and say, hey, like, what do you like? What don't you like? Because for us, generally speaking, it tends to be like minor cosmetic changes, but actually those minor changes can have a pretty big impact in terms of the value they're getting from the report, even if it's just like slicing a different date slice or looking at products in a different way. And then the other thing, I guess, which comes back to having fractured data, like if the data's there, then like make it accessible to people, let people play around. Generally speaking, people tend to know what they want. So if you can give them the tools to kind of build something out, even if they need some help or then come back and play, I think that's generally helpful. And often they come back with ideas or views that you would never thought of yourself, but you're just not in the day-to-day in the same extent. Like you're kind of more in your own silo, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, if you can offer something at zero cost, if you can incorporate and get feedback early, and if you can make the data accessible to people so they can play around, I think that's help with buy-in across the business. But the first one certainly helps. Like something for nothing. Like most people will say, "Oh, let me find out a little bit about it," since I'm not gonna, you're not gonna come ask me for budget or something like that. Who's your audience, I guess, is pretty critical, right? Like And when I say audience, I guess you could also say it's layers of audience, right? So you might have a set of data and a set of outcomes that you have for, I don't know, let's say, for example, a head of FP&A, but that might look differently. Although the same data, it might look a slightly different output to, say, C-suite, CFO, CEO, whoever it might be. So I think knowing the audience and how you're trying to, what you're trying to convey, um, and I still come back to the fundamental belief, like, I don't just build, like, there's no point in looking at data for data's sake. Like, there's got to be some kind of question or problem or some reason that you're looking at the data. Like, if you're looking in a big data set, it's essentially like a needle in a haystack, unless you kind of know, roughly speaking, like, what is your concern or what are you trying to look at. If I take the example, say, from the collection side, like, it could have been a basic thing, like, okay, what does our collections profile look like over the month? Like, is there specific days there, we typically see higher volumes? If we do see those higher volumes, why do we see them? If we don't see them a certain day, like, why is that? Is it because there's a public holiday? Is it because certain customer had a issue with an invoice or whatever it might be? So I think, identifying the problem you're trying to solve and then who the audience is that you're trying to then kind of communicate with. Otherwise, you don't really have any direction. You can just kind of go through endless kind of reels of data, essentially.